He is a chartered accountant, a fellow member of the institute, having more than 3 decades of experience, and he is mainly focused into the area of international tax and transfer pricing. His firm, Vispi Patel Associates, has been declared. Sorry, so modest. He says that he does not want me to go into those formal introduction, but of course, he has been listed as one of the eminent firms in India in the field of international taxation and transfer pricing. I will not be going too much into the biodata because that does not. He has very specifically told me that we should not do that. So I will not do that. But only thing which I would like to say is that whenever a chamber we call it, the best part about Vispi sir is that whenever we invite him on any occasion of the chamber, he is always available, never says no, and always shares his knowledge and wisdom with all of us. With these very few words, which are really not sufficient to introduce an eminent person like him, I would present before you Shri Vispi Patel. And I request you all to welcome him to the Lord of Praise. Before I request Vispi sir to please deal with the topic, I would request Paras Bhai to please offer a memento as a mark of love and respect to us. I would request Vispi sir to please address.
Yes. Good evening, Ketan, Paras, Devendra, Rahul, and friends in the audience. I think the introductions are odious. The most important thing is I'm a professional. I come here, I share a little bit of grey matter which I have. And then we take it forward and we try and see what we can do and how do you interpret. I don't know whether I understand the meaning of the word interpretation of tax treaties. I'll try and dwell on that subject to the best of my ability. To try and understand that what is the difference between tax treaties and domestic tax law, what is the difference between a piece of legislation and a piece of agreement. So we try and focus on that and we try and see what we can gain from the discussion. Probably I'll gain more from you than what I can give you. And therefore, what we try and do is, actually the topic interpretation of tax treaties would take you away from the DTAA. Means it would take you away from the treaty and it would then only focus probably more in depth on what is interpretation. So then that becomes a very esoteric discussion. And so Ketan told me that what I should try and discuss with you all and try and share with you all is that what is the treaty and how do you see the treaty and the articles of the treaty. I think that makes it a more simpler way to see it. And in between that, I'll try and give you a little bit of idea of what is an interpretation of a treaty to the extent that time prevails. And of course, the other part of the topic which is there is interpretation of transfer pricing, but to what extent. So I only tried to relate it to the treaty, try and interpret the provisions of transfer pricing from 92 to 92F, and of course now there is EPA and other things. Maybe it requires more time, but to the extent that I try to cover whatever Ketan has requested me to cover, so we'll try and see what is a treaty and then take it forward. Okay? So what is a tax treaty? It's like an agreement which is ratified by two nations. So therefore that's known as a bilateral treaty. It would also have a multilateral treaty where more than two countries can ratify it, can sign it, and can become legally bound by it. I think I'll introduce some very, very pertinent and very, very incisive concepts of what is this meaning of the word treaty. Because I think till we don't understand that, then we will not understand what is the meaning of interpretation of a treaty. We'll try and get there step by step. So I mean, the way tax professionals understand, and when I say tax professionals, I believe the chartered accountants, law accountants practice tax law. I don't know whether that's correct or not. And lawyers always practice law. I believe I'm always a student of law and I'll die a student of law, probably tax law because that's something which I'm passionate about. So why does this tax treaty, I mean how did it evolve and why did it evolve? It's because initially centers of economic activity were centered in small cities and then cities became nations, so it was centered in nations. So the mobility of commerce was less. When I say mobility of commerce means mobility of finance was less. So as finance became mobile, as trade became mobile, and now of course it is beyond mobility, it is digitization of commerce now. And therefore you have e-commerce platforms, B2B, B2C, and you have various different facets of commercial life which are evolving every day. So what happens is that you have commerce on two sides of the borders, that is two nations, and therefore there is a taxation which arises out of that particular commercial activity, and therefore this gives rise to treaties because you want to encourage commercial activity, but the people who are involved in commercial activity do not want to see their rupee which is being earned or dollar which is being earned taxed in more than one country. And of course, if they could, they would avoid taxation in both countries. Because tax is a burden. Whether equitable or not is something for us to decide at a later stage. When we have very, very prominent politicians, rulers, who rule us through the parliament. And they are supposed to be our fathers. I do not know to what extent they deserve our taxation, but our country does require our taxation. So therefore, you have a situation where there is taxation on two sides, and therefore you try and release that burden of taxation, and therefore birth to treaties is given, and therefore birth to agreements between two nations to encourage trade, commerce, exchange of information. You have treaties, and they try and avoid what is most commonly known as double taxation. And why does this arise? Because the place of residence of a taxpayer, whether he be an individual or a non-individual, is governed by the domestic law. Means, for example, for us, it is the Indian Income Tax Act 1961, which is the Charging Act, which brings tax to income which is earned in India or globally. So therefore, the premise is that the home country or the country of residence has the right of global taxation, but it is very possible that certain countries may not tax you on global income, and therefore you have what is known as territoriality-based taxation, that is taxation only from the sources which arise in that particular country. Example is Singapore, for example. And then you have a country where the income actually arises, and therefore there is a play of the country of residence and the country of source. So that is what you normally understand as residence-based taxation and source-based taxation. So therefore, to relieve this taxation in the country of residence, always remember that the relief is available only in the country which has the right to tax you on a global basis. So therefore, to relieve that taxation, there was the birth to treaties. So now we try and understand that. You may give any name to it, you may call it a tax treaty, you may call it a double taxation avoidance agreement, you may call it a double tax convention. They are only names. You may name it whichever way you want. So therefore, I mean, how would you define a treaty? And I think it's important to understand this definition a little. The Vienna Convention on Law of Treaties defines a treaty. And I think if you read the definition, there are subparts to it. It's an international agreement which is concluded between two states, that is two sovereign countries, in written form, because it's a treaty, so it's written. You could also have oral agreements, but then they will not be treaties, then they would be customary international law. and they are governed by international law, whether embodied in a single instrument and whatever its particular designation. So I think what does this definition bring out? It brings out a couple of very basic concepts. Because if those basic concepts are absent, then your treaty is only a piece of paper. So what is this most basic concept? Is there is an intention, very critical. There is an intention between the contracting parties to be bound by an agreement which creates legal obligation. So therefore, a treaty or a tax treaty. Tax treaty is only one nuance of a treaty. Results from an intention of the parties to the agreement to be bound legally, and not only legally bound, but legally bound by international law. So therefore, it creates international rights, it creates obligations, and there is an aspect of commitment to be bound by international law, and therefore it is objectively established that the intention of the parties is to get bound by that agreement. So once there is a double taxation avoidance agreement, the countries cannot escape the legal obligation which results from that particular treaty. And that obligation is best emphasized. For example, the hue and cry which is there in the tax world, that, for example, the treaty between India and Mauritius does not allow India to tax capital gains on the alienator, if he is resident of Mauritius, on gains resulting from the transfer of movable property, mainly stocks and shares of Indian companies. So therefore, whether our tax department likes it or not, whether our Indian government likes it or not, because there is an agreement, it creates international rights, it creates international law, it will be governed by international law, and therefore that is the distinct characteristics of an international agreement, is the objective intention to be bound by the agreement, then only a treaty is created. So therefore, just like an agreement between A and B, which is private law, you get bound by certain promises and reciprocal commitments. So similarly, a treaty is bound by international law. So this I just wanted to give you a little background, because this background is critical, because then we try and understand. Of course, this seminar or this conference or this discussion cannot even come to grips what is international law, because that itself is a vague term. But I'll try and dwell on it at the right time, only for a few minutes, so that it gives you some background of what is the meaning of international law. So therefore, when two countries sign a tax treaty, and that is a treaty between two sovereign countries. But when the state, when for example, if the government of India intends to sell a particular property to the US for putting up its embassy, though that may be an agreement between two countries, it is private law, because it does not get, or the object is not to be bound in international law. It's a transfer of property, maybe between two governments, or maybe between one association and a government, or between two private parties. So that is private international law. This is public international law. Now why is it necessary to know the objectives of a tax treaty? Because if you don't understand the intention behind coming into an agreement, how will you interpret the agreement? So for example, if you want to understand what is the interpretation of the tax law, Indian Income Tax Act 1961, you have to understand what is the object of that law. What is the object of an income tax law? Is to tax income. So I will repeat the words. It is to tax income. And what is income is undefined. People may say it is defined in 224. It is defined in section 14. But the concept is to tax income. And what is income has been fairly interpreted in jurisprudence. So under the Indian Income Tax Act, we will tax only that income which is stated to be income under section
2 subsection 24.
Okay, so if it's like a question answer, then I will. Okay, so it's 224 read with section 14. So even the income which is there in 224 has to find its place in section 14. Otherwise, the chargeability will be there or not is questionable. So therefore, if you don't know the object behind the agreement, you will not understand how to interpret that agreement. So therefore, what is normally the objective of a tax treaty is to avoid double taxation. That is the most basic concept. Prevent tax evasion, now exchange of information, allocate tax jurisdiction. What is the meaning of allocate tax jurisdiction? I'll come to it. Is giving right to the source state or the resident state to tax that income wherever it arises. Promote mutual economic relations, trade and investment, and now it is also recovery of tax. So it's like this, and I think I'll come to it at the right time, that when the developed countries feel the pinch of their tax base getting eroded, so they come out with esoteric concepts of BEPS and other things, but let us try and always understand that those concepts are also always ingrained in domestic law. So for example, our business connection law, which tells you how foreigners are to be taxed, is far wider than the permanent establishment principle of taxation. But today they get affected, yesterday they were not affected, so they protected residence-based taxation. I'll come to that later. So these are the objectives of a treaty. I mean, how did treaties evolve, a tax treaty especially? I've just tried to give you a little bit of history. They say when you know your history well, you understand the present circumstances better. Because the history gives a relation, a correlation between how law has evolved, how the agreements are evolving today, as compared to what they were originally in a couple of decades back, maybe a century back, maybe half a century back. So, therefore, the historic advancement of how commerce increased, cross-border commerce, has the direct relevance to the interpretation and to the evolution of tax treaties. Because you have to understand that treaties evolved only when taxpayers started feeling the pinch of double taxation. If you don't feel the pinch and if you are still in barter, you don't require a DTA, you don't. As you become more sophisticated, you require DTA. Then when government started seeing that their tax base is getting eroded due to more sophisticated methodologies of doing commerce, and today digitization, internet, telecommunication, and therefore you find that when commerce becomes more fluid, more mobile, structures become more fluid, more mobile of doing business, and therefore you feel that now there is a pinch on the governments also, not only taxpayers, but governments to try and protect zealously their tax base. So therefore, this has now become the evolution of treaties. And will treaties change? Probably. Will the principles and the methodologies of writing treaties change? they have to evolve over a period of time. And therefore, when you see the history of how the tax treaties evolved, it became because of commerce. And therefore, when countries started giving credit for taxes paid in the source country where the income arose, but the residence-based countries, the resident countries started relieving double taxation, you found the evolution of treaties. So first US gave, then Netherlands and Belgium gave, and then when the matter became more important, you had the first four principles adopted in 21, then in 22, and after the First World War in the League of Nations, I think you had the Mexican draft in 43, and then in 46 the London model, and then in 56 OECD involved. But please remember, OECD as a body evolved only to protect the developed countries, not to give taxation to the source-based taxation or to the developing countries. And therefore you then had the UN model which came about, but unfortunately the level of work that has gone in the OECD is not there as much as the UN model. But now the UN model, the latest one, the 2011 one, has more articles, better explanation, and more teeth they want to give to the developing countries to tax source-based income. And as developing countries become more critical in the geopolitics of world commerce, they will exercise more control over how internationally treaties will evolve and how international commerce will evolve. So as India progresses, as China has progressed, and as the other developing countries start progressing, and the third wave will be when African countries progress. Because now the potential is in Africa, because it's untapped, they say. But the rule of law may not be there, the rule of commerce may not be there. And luckily, because of the British history, we had a rule of law in India, which is still present there today. So therefore, as developing countries and third world countries evolve, so also the concepts of international tax will evolve, and especially in today's age when methods of commerce evolve. And today you have e-commerce, tomorrow you may have m-commerce, tomorrow you may have treasury only in a packet of the mobile, you may not require a bank account also. What happens tomorrow we don't know. People will trade in bytes instead of real money, and you have this particular currency which has come into being, biocoin, whatever you call them, bitcoins, and therefore what will happen tomorrow we don't know. So as that will evolve, law will have to keep pace with it. So now let's try and understand quickly what are the types of tax treaties. You have comprehensive treaties and you have limited treaties. Limited treaties were signed only for particular types of income which arose, like income from operation of aircrafts and ships, estates, inheritance, gifts, and also today exchange of information. You have what are known as only treaties for information, PAIs, and then you have comprehensive treaties. What's the position of treaty in India? That's important. Section 90 of the Indian Income Tax Act has delegated the signing of treaties to the central government. So, the Income Tax Act, and from where does the Income Tax Act flow? It flows from the Constitution of India. So therefore this is known as delegated legislation, whereby the central government through its representatives can enter into treaties. Then you also have treaties not only between countries but also between specified territories. Now you can also have agreement between specified associations which is approved by the central government. Section 91 is the section which provides unilateral tax relief to Indian residents. And treaties form part of conduct of foreign affairs. It is governed by the CA, that is the competent authority, who negotiates treaties, which is the Joint Secretary Foreign Tax Division of CBDT. In India, they say negotiations take place behind closed doors, and it is approved only by the government. Most countries have the practice that for treaties to be established, it has to be placed before the parliament. And unless treaties are sanctioned by the parliament, then till that time there is no effect in law. But that is not the same role in India. So let's try and understand. We have understood what you would call what is a treaty, how it evolved. Let's try and understand the distinctive features, if there are any, between interpretation of a tax treaty vis-a-vis domestic law. So when you see a treaty, it's an agreement. You have to understand that it's not a piece of legislation. I keep on stressing that. Why? Because when we come to a later part of the discussion, I'll try and make you understand that particular perspective. So it's an agreement between two states which involves a negotiation process, and therefore you will find that when India signs a treaty with the developed countries, its treaties may have certain lacunas. Lacuna may not be the most apt word, may have certain concessions to the developed countries, which you may not find when it signs countries with equals or their peers, where you may find that certain clauses in the treaty or certain articles in the treaty may be more favorable to Indian taxation, while in the other case it may be more favorable to residence-based taxation. So therefore, this negotiation process is the critical difference between a piece of legislation and a double taxation avoidance agreement. So therefore, it involves a negotiation process, it gives relief from double tax, it also expounds who has the taxing jurisdiction. So there is sharing of tax revenues, cannot be frequent changes, so there can be changes by way of protocol, or even renegotiate the whole treaty. It's bound by international law. And I think this concept has still not evolved, and it will evolve in India, it will evolve all across the globe. That treaties are an agreement between two sovereign nations with an object and intention to create legal obligation and to be bound in international law. And that is the critical difference between domestic legislation and treaties. And disputes are settled either by appellate forum, courts, or mutual agreement procedure, also known as the competent authority procedure, and now by arbitration also. So, what is the domestic law? Domestic law gets its teeth from the Constitution of India. So there is no question of negotiation. It's a piece of legislation which is drafted by our so-called wise parliamentarians who believe they know the law, and therefore it is embedded in the Constitution, and therefore it's the power of every sovereign nation to have tax laws, to tax income, because it's part of the fiscal policy. So there is no negotiation, there is a charge of tax, there is earning of tax revenue, there are frequent changes, and disputes are settled as stated in the law by the appellate forum and the courts. So this is the distinctive features between a treaty, that is an international treaty, and between domestic law. So what's the typical structure of a treaty? So you have a scope of convention, you have definitions, you have the various taxing rights, so we'll go through it quickly. This is the way you can divide the treaty. One is the scope provisions. If you don't know the scope, it's like this. Income Tax Act charges income, but Section 5 was, if it was not there, then what would be the scope? So the scope of an agreement, the scope of domestic law is critical, is important. So what does the scope provide for? Who will be covered? What will be covered? Which taxes? Where, from which date will it be covered? Entry in force, and when will it come to an end? The date of termination of the treaty. So then you have the normal provisions, the definition provisions, the anti-avoidance provisions. the elimination of double taxation. How is it? What is the structure through which double tax is avoided? And then you have miscellaneous provisions. The article on non-discrimination, the article for diplomats, and territorial extension. So, the substantive articles are the articles which deal with the distribution of taxing rights on income which are arising in the source state. So these are the articles 6 to 22. These are known as the substantive articles or the principle of distribution of taxing rights. So articles 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to 22. We'll cover that, so there's no need to dwell on this slide. So now the important thing is, to whom does the treaty apply? So for example, the Indian Income Tax Act applies to all residents and non-residents. Scope of taxation given by Section 5. What is a resident, who is a resident, who is not a resident, given by Section 6. So similarly, to whom does the treaty apply? So when you see the evolution of treaties, the original and the early treaties actually only applied to taxpayers. As treaties evolved, now they are applicable to residents. So, applies to a person who was a resident of one or both of the contracting states. Hence, if a person is not a resident of both the countries but a resident of the third country, then the treaty won't apply to him. And who is the person is defined in section Article 3. And the taxes covered are normally income taxes. Taxes on income, taxes on capital, and list of taxes. Irrespective of the authority on behalf of which such taxes are imposed, or irrespective of the method by which the taxes are levied. So what is important is, you should know the parameters of the treaty, just as you should know the parameters of a taxing statute. A taxing statute cannot tax everything under the sun in India. It cannot. It can only tax that for which it is drafted or legislated. Similarly, a treaty covers only particular persons and particular taxes. So therefore, under the general definitions, a person is defined as an individual, a company, or any other body of persons. A company is any body corporate or any entity that is treated as a body corporate. An enterprise of a contracting state and an enterprise of the other contracting state. Any international traffic, any transport by a ship or aircraft in international waters in a contracting state, except when the ship or aircraft is operated solely between places in the other contracting state. So these are general definitions. Competent authority, national, any individual possessing the nationality of a contracting state, any legal person, partnership or association which derives this status on a similar basis or as per the law in force in that contracting state. I think now this is important, and there is a controversy on the interpretation of a treaty. They say that terms not defined in the treaty will find their meaning from the domestic law. So there is one school of thought which says that this Article 3.2 is a limitation on the interpretation of treaty as per international law, while another school of thought is that this ability for domestic legislation to find its place creatingly into a treaty is only when words are not defined and the ordinary meaning cannot be gathered from the treaty. So this was one perspective which I just wanted to share with you. Now the important thing is, when we say India, so Article 3 provides the territorial scope. So India, for example, is defined to mean the territory of India and includes territorial sea and airspace above it, as well as other maritime zones in which India has sovereign rights as per all other rights and jurisdiction according to Indian law and international law. Similarly, other contracting states will provide for its territorial scope, and it is necessary because you should understand to whom does it apply. So, for example, our Indian Income Tax Act applies only to the state of India, including Jammu and Kashmir. It cannot extend beyond India because our constitution won't allow us to make extraterritorial jurisdiction, except to a limited extent. So similarly, to understand the parameters or the limitations of the treaty, we have to understand which states are covered. So when you interpret a tax treaty, you have to not only understand who is covered, what is covered, but which countries are covered. So for example, India as per our Indian income tax definition means the territory of India is referred to in Article 1 of the Constitution. Its territorial waters, seabed and subsoil underlying such waters, continental shelf, exclusive economic zone or any other maritime zone as referred to in the territorial waters, continental shelf, exclusive economic zone and other maritime zones Act 1976 and the airspace above the territory and territorial waters. So under our exclusive economic zone, it extends to up to 200 nautical miles. Now, I mean that's how international law is developed. Though under custom law, territorial waters is only 12 nautical miles. So now let's see the prominent articles in the definition, and because residence is important, let's try and understand how residence is interpreted in a treaty. A person is a resident of a country, that is a contracting state, it is liable to tax in the country by virtue of domicile, residence, place of incorporation, place of management or any other criteria of a similar nature. So therefore, the important words are liable to tax. Later part of the discussion, we'll try and understand what is the meaning of liable to tax. So therefore, the term resident does not include persons who are only taxed on the sources of income that emanate from that state itself. So it is only to become a resident when that country taxes on income which is global, or if it is a territory-based taxation system in that country, then you will be treated as a resident of that country. Now, if you are a resident of both countries, you could become a resident of both countries according to the domestic law. Then there is what is known as the tiebreaker rule. So I just wanted to make you understand that when you understand treaty, how do you understand the tiebreaker rule? So what is the tiebreaker rule? It breaks the tie between the two countries. Why is it known as the tiebreaker rule? Because it splits taxing jurisdiction's authority. So even though you may be a resident of two states under the domestic law, which is known as the municipal law. So for example, a person, an individual may be a resident of India as well as a resident of US under the domestic law. Then, how do you break the tie to find out who has the taxing jurisdiction under the treaty? Because then the country of residence has to relieve double taxation as per the India-US treaty. So therefore the first test is that if you are a resident of both countries under the domestic law, then the first test is where the resident has a permanent home available to him. That is known as the abode test. If he has an abode in both countries, then he is the resident of that country where his economic relationship and personal relation is more active, that is center of vital interest. Even there, if the tiebreaker fails, then he would be the country where he has the habitual abode. And even if habitual abode fails, then the test of nationality. of which country is the taxpayer a national. And lastly, if a taxpayer is a national of both countries, then the competent authority of both the states can determine his residence by mutual agreement. So this is how the tiebreaker is split. In the case of non-individuals, it is the place of effective management if the entity is a resident of both contracting state. And what is effective management is not defined, but it can briefly be stated to be where the company is not de jure controlled but de facto controlled, in principle, in substance, not in form. That is the place of effective management. And it should be ascertained on the facts of each case. And there is no thumb rule. It will all depend upon the facts of each case. Now, what is the difference between liable to tax and subject to tax is important. A treaty says that a person is a resident of the country of which he is liable to tax. Being liable to tax in a country does not necessarily mean that a taxing provision is imposed on you. That does not mean that you are subject to tax, but you are liable to tax as per the laws of that country. Though the country may have for a temporary period or may not have legislated on the taxing laws at all, still you will be liable to tax in that country and therefore you will be a resident of that country. And this principle has been enunciated well in ADIT versus Green Elements, which has been followed in resource connections and Meta. Now we come to one of the most controversial articles, or one of the most important articles, which is the differentiation point between the establishment of a business and the income arising due to passive income. And that's the article on permanent establishment. So let's try and just understand it. So, and we have used the UN treaty for the purposes of this presentation. So you will find that this presentation is in line with the UN model treaty. So the permanent establishment is defined to mean a fixed place from where the business of the enterprise is wholly or partly carried on by an enterprise of the other contracting state. So